days, we can get this posted online so you can go back and rewatch if you wanted to, or share with your communities. So today's meeting, we have a pretty packed agenda. Farouk, if you wouldn't mind, bring up the slides. We can kind of talk about that a little bit before we get into a little discussion with some technical group members. It was requested that we have a few our technical group members join us tonight and be available to ask questions and we provide some answers to you all tonight. So we're going to do that first. So I'd like to introduce from WMATA, we have Stephen Segerlin. Stephen, if you could maybe introduce yourself and tell these folks a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Segerlin. I'm from work at Metro in the Office of Real Estate and Parking, and I oversee our station area planning activities, which includes both our project development and scoping work for what we call joint development projects, or what others call transit-oriented development. The word joint development is a term from the Federal Transit Administration about when there are private uses on publicly owned property that's owned by a transit authority. And the other part of my portfolio that I coordinate are access improvements at stations, which may include improvements for vehicular and bus access and bicycle and pedestrian access. So the sort of topic of our meeting today being that last part.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Appreciate you being here. We have from VDOT, Alex Fogarty. If you could introduce yourself to the group, please.
Sure, yeah, hi, Alex Fogarty from VDOT Northern Virginia District. I work in the land development section. I review rezoning applications and site plans, primarily in Tyson's and a bunch of other districts. But I also was involved with the study for the EYA West Falls Church application, which I think it's relevant to this general discussion. Yeah, so I also review traffic studies and do a little bit of traffic analysis in addition to the engineering review of the site plans. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. From Fairfax County Public Schools, we have Sally Smallwood.
I'm the Safe Routes to School Coordinator for Fairfax County Public Schools, and I think I let you know that we did do some travel tally surveys with the students last week, and I haven't had a chance to do the data entry, but as soon as I do, I will give you the results of the travel tallies to let you know how our students are moving to and from school.
Great, thank you, Sally. Let's see, we have also Reg Veray from Virginia Tech.
Good evening, everyone. Reginald Ray, Technology Implementation Program Manager with Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, working in particular to identify certain types of technologies that could be leveraged to improve the benefits for the citizens and the city alike, and part of the planning project. So a pleasure to speak here and be with you guys. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. And before we kind of open it up to the group here, Farouk, could you go to the next slide? Just want to cover what we're going to be going over today after the technical group discussion. So, we had a few recent meetings. We had the two community meetings, one on February 9th, one on February 12th. Some of you attended those. I thought they went really well. We had a presentation just to introduce the scope of this project, go over what some of our goals are and how we're hoping to achieve those. Went through the makeup of the advisory group, what you all do, and the technical group. And then, of course, had plenty of time for Q&A. And that's where we got a lot of good feedback that really informed some of the maps that you guys reviewed before joining the meeting tonight, some of the recommendations that we've put on those maps. So two good meetings. And then we had a meeting with the technical group, some of those members here today. Obviously, we had a meeting with all of them on March 2nd and brought up some of the questions that some of you either sent via email or asked during the meetings. Got clarification on a few items and recommendations, ideas for implementing some of the recommendations. So very productive meeting, and continue to work with them and bring them your thoughts and ideas and concerns. So after we open it up for the technical group discussion, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the funding piece of this. We had tried to get our coordination and funding division folks here tonight, but unfortunately there was a scheduling conflict, so we will be getting them to the next meeting. I'll make sure that we can work with them on that. But I do have some high-level points to cover as far as funding is concerned. And then after that, we'll review the City of Falls Church plans. A number of you had wanted some more information on what the city is planning. So we have several plans that they're working on and efforts that they're doing. And I'll review those with you all to kind of consider how we might link up with those various facilities that they're planning in terms of bike ed. Then I'll go over the pedestrian level of comfort methodology we talked about last time and cover the different quadrant maps. So first we'll look at the 1 mile pedestrian improvements and the recommendations that we have noted there. And then after that, we'll look at something we haven't focused too much on yet, which is the wider 2 mile bicycle network and what improvements we want to see in that network. And then finally, as with all meetings, I'll kind of end with the next steps and Q&A, both for the advisory group and members of the public. So without further ado, at least for the next 20 to 30 minutes, however long we might need, I want to open it up to you all in the advisory group to ask your questions of the technical group members that are here, anything that you want to ask them or points you want to raise with them. Please feel free to raise your hand and do that now.
Before we do that, I just want to do a quick clerical thing. There's a couple people on the phone, and I'll help call the people for Tim, but I need a number 571-226-7108. Can you just identify yourself, please? (571-226-7108). Can you please identify yourself? All right, I'll come back. And there's another one, 703-969-5325.
Yes, hello. My name is Leah Socha. I'm a resident of Fairfax County Falls Church that lives on Great Falls Street, and I just want to hear what's being discussed regarding safety measures at the intersection of Great Falls and Moley all the way through Haycock.
That's great. I just trying to get a roster of people who are calling in. Thank you. And the other person again, 571-226-7108. Can you please identify yourself?
Hi, I'm sorry. I'll sleep with the switch. That's me, Robert Boggs. I'm on the group.
Ah, okay, thank you.
And I can see you on my computer, but I'm using my cell phone for audio. So
that's fine. I just wanted to get in that sense. Great, thank you.
No,
okay.
Thanks for your consideration.
Yep. All right. Tim, first one up is Bruce Wright.
Hi. Yeah, I've got I guess 2 quick questions. One is, did the advisory group consider doing a walk shed and or a bike shed where it's like a watershed where you flow the people who are walking and have good access, and if they're trying to reach the station, how many can do that easily, because that is a good way to highlight where there are barriers. And then the second is, I mean, we might get into this later, but there's a major trail that goes from Route 7 just past I-66 that goes north, follows I-66, and then goes up to the station. And when I looked at Google Maps, that shows up as a bike route, but it's not shown on the maps. So at some point, I'd like to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. So for the walk shed piece, we do have on the study area map, highlighted in green, I believe, a walk shed, the effective walk shed. So showing where you can actually walk to, not as a crow flies, but following the street network or the sidewalks. We don't have that for cyclists. I can see how easy that might be to do, and see if I can come back with something for future meeting if that's something of interest that you guys would like to see. And then for the trail, so are you talking about the trail that kind of loops around the ball field in the
Yes.
City of Falls Church and comes up? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can see if we can make that clear on the map.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Next up, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Tim. I actually have questions for everybody, but I'll start with WMATA. And since we didn't tape the session last week and I reviewed the minutes, I just want to go on the record as saying, when I asked EYA if EYA was going to request a reduction in the number of parking spaces and ask for a reduction in the county's minimum parking requirements, the EYA representative answered yes. EYA planned to do that. I just wanted that to be on the record. Steve, my first question is, when WMATA announced its agreement with EYA, WMATA promised the community it was going to host a community meeting. EYA and WMATA have reached out to the communities, the condo communities that were on the West Falls Church Task Force, but not the larger community. So when can we expect to be invited to a WMATA community briefing? That's question number one.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of any changes to WMATA facilities, by our under our bylaws, we have this process called a compact public hearing that we must hold. And that compact public hearing is open to the general public to receive comments on the changes to those transit facilities. We did get approval last summer from our board to hold that compact public hearing. And we're hoping that we can have it later in the summertime. The reason for the delay is twofold. One, we've been coordinating with the county on some of the details of the transit facilities, so that when we do hold this compact public hearing, the descriptions of both the park and ride and kiss and ride and bus facilities, bike and ped are all clarified so that we can give a clear description of the changes. And there are some details that we're still trying to refine about many of these facilities and are in discussions with the county, and meetings like this are also providing input into that. So the goal is to have that public hearing when there's sort of general consensus on those details, so that we can get that round of feedback from the general public. The other reason why the schedule got slightly delayed is we are during the spring months in Metro is our budgeting season. And so the Office of the Secretary at Metro prefers that the only compact hearings we do during the spring are about those board capital and operating budget discussions. So it'll probably be the summertime before we would have this meeting on the changes to transit facilities at West Falls Church. We have to post materials for that meeting 30 days in advance, so that the public has time to review them and then do communications in newspapers and other outlets to make sure that there's adequate notification about that opportunity to comment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You touched on one of the other questions that has come up throughout our community, and that is the status of the Kiss and Ride lot. And people are quite rightfully concerned about the slides that EYA has shown that I think shows a real reduction in kiss and ride. And, you know, for those of us who went through the kiss and ride in the 1990s and the early 2000s, you often couldn't even get into that lot. And I think you're making assumptions that metro ridership in this area is never going to require more spaces. And our concern is once you build up all this property, you don't have extra space if you need to add. So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that. And then our other concern is the EYA presenter seemed to say that the Metro Garage with its 1,400 parking places will be sufficient. You know, again, I think what are we judging here? Maybe sufficient for 2022 with all of this extra building, but it seems to be a little short-sighted not to have adequate parking with the expectation at some point commuter ridership is going to tick back up at West Falls Church, particularly if the county is not interested in building parking facilities along the Silver Line. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll have questions for the other guests.
Yeah, regarding the kiss and ride and park and ride and the size or the capacity of the facilities, the team has developed some analyses looking at demand trends, actually using pre-COVID growth rates. And we looked at a couple of different ways of trying to calculate growth depending on the information sources used, whether it be census data and trends versus land use plans. And then there's something that the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments publishes about household and employment growth that's geographic based. So we've been working with the county on evaluating those trend lines to figure out the right amount of spaces to be retained. And in that compact public hearing document, those would be included as attachments to the hearing materials. And then also at the task force meetings that were held, which I think there's also a website on the county website, those materials are also there about those analyses.
We're going to turn over to Mitch real quick. Mitch, you have your hand up.
Hi, thanks. Mitch Bonanno. So I am resident in Chestnut Place, right at Route 7 and Chestnut. I'm the HOA president. And I have a question that covers several of our guests and probably is half technical and half policy, but it's regarding sort of comprehensive traffic planning and traffic calming. So it tees off a question from a prior meeting where we talked about some speed humps that were potentially proposed for Chestnut Street, but that the evaluation showed they weren't necessitated on Dale Drive. And that's looking at sort of current counts, not future projections. So, you know, in a process like this, like we're covering multiple projects, multiple jurisdictions. So I know we're speaking specific of Fairfax County, but Falls Church projects affect this, and it all sort of ties together. Like, how is there a way that we could better look at this comprehensively from a traffic and traffic calming standpoint of all these different projects and future projections, so that, you know, when you're looking at traffic calming in a neighborhood, something like Dale Drive, it doesn't just fall under the Fairfax neighborhood traffic calming group program that sort of goes out and does a count and says, nope, not required. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part, it's kind of specific to WMATA on these joint projects and things like that, is obviously a financial deal with the developer, and WMATA benefits from that financial deal. Is there ever any funding from projects like that get contributed to broader county projects in the area from WMATA, or is it just always the other way around, that the counties sort of funding WMATA and the county's dealing with the developer and doing that directly with them. So let me pause because that was probably a lot.
Well, I can take the first part. So we do have the RTAP process that you're referring to, the Residential Traffic Administration Program, and we do need to work through that process. One of the primary reasons for that is for the community buy-in, especially for traffic calming devices like speed humps. There has to be a task force developed to review the sort of treatments that you would do with traffic calming. And get buy-in from the neighborhoods that are, or the neighbors rather, that are affected. And there are thresholds that, as you mentioned, that need to be met in order to be able to implement some of those devices. Now, that being said, there are other ways to calm traffic. And I think that some of the things that we're talking about as part of this study can contribute to that. So whether it's putting in sidewalks, making these streets more pedestrian, bicycle oriented, that could in effect slow traffic, calm traffic. But as for the formal process, putting in speed bumps and those sorts of things, that does need to follow the RTAP.
Right. Thank you. I totally understand the neighborhood buy-in part. The challenging part is it's looking at today's data and traffic counts and thresholds, right? So it's like, okay, once there's a problem and you exceed the traffic counts and all of that, then it can qualify. But is there any way to use, prospective projections to help from the technical side if you have community buy-in?
Unfortunately not. It is something that's based on existing conditions at the time, so you wouldn't necessarily put in a speed hump or any other sort of cut through mitigations, expecting in the future to be able to need to mitigate for those. So it is based on the existing conditions on the roadway you're studying.
We get the second question again, Mitch, do you mind? Just want to make sure I get it right.
Sure. It's just about funding for all these different improvements we're talking about here in this process. I know it was an open-ended question, right? And we're going through this process, but there is not currently designated funding for all these improvements that we're going to come up with. So the question was, when you have a project like the WMATA joint development, so WMATA has a financial arrangement with the developer. WMATA is getting paid in some fashion for their land or so forth. Is any of that funding ever carved off to help with neighborhood mitigation, traffic mitigation, other things, or is that purely the county's responsibility in reviewing the site plan and dealing with the developer to handle that?
So I'll say it's purely the county's responsibility along with the applicant's responsibility to identify the impacts and identify the appropriate mitigations. What WMATA has worked out with EYA is kind of their own kind of contractual obligations. The county doesn't have any, is not party to that. But through this particular effort, we identify the kind of the projects that this group thinks is priorities, and then we see if they kind of fit within the actual development application when it comes in. So that's kind of why we're obviously trying to get this kind of list together and have it prioritized from this group. But that's generally how it's done. There's a nexus and a proportionality that we also have to keep in mind when they actually do the zoning application.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up is Bruce Jones, and then Cheryl, you're after Bruce. Bruce,
you might need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Gotcha.
Okay. Evan Goldman, the vice president of EYA, had said that EYA would be convening a public community meeting in March or April after they had received some initial feedback from county staff on the rezoning application they had filed in December. So I think that's the meeting Cheryl was asking about earlier, which of necessity would include issues such as, for example, the smaller number of kiss and ride spaces, because that's part of the redevelopment plan. And then in responding to Cheryl, the WMATA representative spoke a meeting sometime in the summer, a public hearing regarding the changes to the transit operations there. Are those the same meeting or are those two different meetings?
Yeah, I can answer that. It is the same meeting. I think Evan might have misspoke about the expected timing of that meeting. And that there had been discussions for some time about could we get it to happen in the spring. And as we had been coordinating with WMATA and the board schedule, there was the preference to not hold compact public hearings during the budget season at Metro. So that could be the focus of public feedback. So I think that might have just been a communication mix-up, but that should be the same meeting, this compact public hearing. That's
the meeting Evan was talking about was not a public hearing of WMATA. It was a meeting to explain the rezoning application to the community. I don't know, maybe someone else, county staff or Jane Edmondson or Ben Wiles, if he's here, could answer the question.
I'm not aware of a community meeting. I can reach out to Evan and see if I can clarify his comment, but I'm not aware of one planned by him. But I can find out.
Find out the answer to that. All right, moving on. Cheryl and then Mark, and then we'll try to wrap up after Mark so that we can stay on schedule, because the next piece is the one we need to go around the quadrants and really take a lot of feedback from the group. Okay, Cheryl. You're muted, Cheryl. One more time, Cheryl. I think. There, now go.
Is it good?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, my question is for Arslan. One of my neighbors, Leah, mentioned this. She's on the phone. Can you tell us what is going to happen at the Great Falls Haycock intersection? It's a really difficult intersection, and during the comprehensive plan amendment process, EYA and FCDOT alluded to some very minor changes taking place at that intersection. And that intersection only has crosswalks on 2 of the 4 sides. It has very limited setback from the road. People race down the right turn lane from Great Falls onto Haycock. It's a really bad situation. And I never heard anyone from VDOT address this issue. And part of EYA's solution from its Grove Slade experts was a simple changing of the arrows on Haycock. So I would like to know if you've looked into this, if you've looked at the level of traffic that is going to be moving through that intersection as a result of this development. And it really is a top priority for our area. So Arslan, if you can enlighten us, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. From a land development perspective, we have not. Normally, my office receives site plans and land use applications that we review. The problem that you are referring to, I'm not sure if it has been routed to our traffic engineering section. Tom Falls, that is the person responsible to review and recommend the improvements. I am also pretty sure that it was not, the intersection was not looked at during the EYA rezoning application that I was involved with. So I can definitely follow up with our traffic engineering section to determine if the study by Grove Slate has been reviewed and recommendations have been approved, or if they have anything further to add. But beyond that, I'm seriously not aware of of VDOT's involvement with that particular intersection. I can follow up and get back to you on that.
Okay. Mark Kiefer.
Hey, Tim, did you give I submitted written questions before the technical advisory group meeting. And there were a couple on there for Metro, one of which was covered in response to Cheryl's question or Martin's. So for the sake of time, you could give those questions to Stephen.
Sure, and we, before we moved on to the next section, there was a couple other questions that had been asked of the technical group. So I was just going to go over the answers to some of those.
Okay.
Wrap up this portion.
So mine would be included?
I'm not sure if all of yours are included in there, but I'll make sure that any that weren't answered get over to WMATA, certainly.
Yeah, for Virginia Tech, and again, more detailed response can be provided later. The Smart City Testbed project that's funded with a $10 million grant from the state that's planned in connection with these developments. Is Fairfax County a participant and beneficiary of that activity, or is it strictly with Falls Church and strictly bounded by the boundary of the West Falls Church or West End Center, whatever it's called, development?
Hi there. So the money isn't particularly bounded. It's more or less kind of in that development area, but a lot of it will be focusing also within the surrounding city of Falls Church. One thing we are looking at are, at least in the planning phase, is upgrading of some of the signal controllers at those border intersections. So some of the technology deployed, like the signal timing, for example, could have a positive influence on the border side of the city or the Fairfax County as well too. So we are looking into that, and hopefully that's where it could be used to also benefit the rest of the community as well.
So Fairfax County is not a participant?
They are participants. They're part of a stakeholder group. So we have various executive steering committees, working groups, where they have positions and influence and discussion as well too as part of it. So.
Yeah, the thing I'll mention real quickly, and you're probably aware of this or should be, is that the infrastructure situation, and not just at signals, although that's part of the problem, the infrastructure situation is very poor just outside the boundary of this development area. Pedestrian safety, access, bicycling safety and access is a huge problem. And my hope is that this project, the Smart City, and the goals surrounding it would take a look at that to see if there's anything that can be done, that might overlap into what we're trying to do in this study. So thanks for participating in the meeting and being available to answer our questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Some of the technologies that we're looking for depend on implementing our what we call smart intersections. So they do utilize sensors to identify vulnerable road users, and hopefully the impact would be a direct feedback loop into, say, alerting system more directly into the intersection controller to perhaps, hold a light a little bit longer, or detections and algorithms to also provide more safety. So those are definitely kind of key things we intend on doing, especially as our focus with the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute is to save lives and efficiency as well too. So thank you for that and that feedback.
And Tim, just to close, if the Metro question isn't covered, I'll just raise my hand and they can follow up. Thank you.
Sure. Well, so I think since we're already about 7:40, I do want to sort of address some of the other technical group questions in the presentation. So there was one on slope, the slope of the pathway along Haycock Road. As we get to that quadrant, I can talk a little bit about that and what was discussed, as well as some of the questions along Route 7 in particular. So if there are no other questions for the technical group, we can go ahead and proceed.
We need to move on, Tim, so let's get moving. Yeah. If there's any other comments, you can throw them into the chat and we'll get them, and we'll make sure, and everyone else can see them, and we'll make sure they get addressed.
All right, thanks, Mike. So we can go to the next slide. And I mentioned funding. I'll go through this rather briefly, but some of you may have been following some of the activity in the Board Transportation Committee. They just had a meeting on March 1st to discuss a prioritization methodology. Chris Wells, who's also on the phone and actually also on the technical committee, presented to the board a prioritization methodology for a $100 million approval to fund active transportation projects. So this is countywide. This is something that the board has recognized as a deficit in the county, and they've included from the general fund additional money to go towards active transportation projects. So there's an extensive list, hundreds of projects that have been identified, and Chris Wells and his team have worked on a really rigorous methodology of trying to prioritize where those are and how to group those accordingly. The board also asked staff to initiate a selection of projects, so more short-term projects like crosswalk improvements, maintenance improvements, with $5 million that was identified as part of that larger pot of money. And so that's something that group is working on as well to try to get the ball rolling, so to speak, on improving active transportation throughout the county. So I wanted to mention that sort of big picture item that the board is working on and the active transportation folks are working on. Now, since I mentioned prioritization, that is something that, of course, is in our scope of work and is going to be a topic of our next advisory group meeting. But of course, we're looking at a much smaller area. It's not the whole county. We're looking at it, a 1 mile radius for ped improvements and 2 miles for bike improvements. So really, the selection and the prioritization of these recommendations is going to come from you all. That will provide you with some tools to help with that. So I'm going to go over pedestrian level of comfort in a moment. And then for the next meeting, I can share some of our other data, such as the vulnerability index and some crash data from VDOT that sort of help with prioritizing these various recommendations, but certainly not going to be as rigorous as what is being done for the entire county with hundreds of projects. So some of the funds, as you can see on the right, that are used for active transportation projects, we have several that we pull from, commercial and industrial taxes being one, NVTA, you've heard me mention that a few times, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. They have local revenues that go towards these projects, general obligation bonds, and of course, as I mentioned, the general fund. And as part of that, we also have, as I've mentioned as well, the transportation priority plan. So several of the projects that we've discussed already and that are included on the map on our website and in the scope of work are noted, and those are part of the transportation priority plan. Those undergo, community outreach and vetting through the community, and those are part of a larger time frame. For this time frame, we're looking at fiscal year 2020 through 2025, to sort of direct funds to those projects. And again, I do hope to get our coordination and funding folks here for that next meeting as we talk more about prioritization and funding, and they can definitely speak a little more intelligently about it than I can. So we can move on to the next slide. So these next several slides are concerning what's being planned in the city of Falls Church. So this is an image from their bicycle master plan. This is a plan they adopted about 8 months after Fairfax County adopted their plan. So this was in 2015. And what I've done in this map is sort of zoom in on the area that we're focusing on. So you can see where they have sort of planned connections into the county. The blue line sort of going up north towards the middle is on Grove Avenue. So you have a bike lane there. You have some other connections coming from the WNOD trail into the county. And so they've thought this out and thought up of a bike network that would continue on into Great Falls Street, to Grove Avenue, as I mentioned, down West Broad Street to Route 7. And so when thinking about what we want to recommend, you know, on some of those streets, this is a good reference point to use. The next slide, and if you could go to the next slide, talks about the West End Small Area Plan. So this is one of the city's small area plans. It covers 3 kind of separate areas here. We're looking at planning opportunity areas, as they call them. You have the school site sort of up in the left corner there. You have the Gordon Triangle below that on the southern portion, alongside the WNOD Trail, and then bordered by Shreve Road and Route 7, or West Broad Street rather, and then the Falls Plaza Shopping Center. And so this is sort of a long-range look at what they intend to implement for peds and bikes. This kind of grid network, as you can see with the yellow and blue lines here. And with that plan, they also have some proposed cross sections. So they have a small section along Haycock Road, as you can see on the first image on the right, and then along West Broad Street, again, a proposed cross section. And you can see that they have accommodations for both pedestrians and cyclists. Go on to the next slide. And of course, you all know this project, the West Falls project. This is the SESP that was approved by City Council in August of last year. And then if you looked at the presentation that I sent prior to the meeting, in the appendix, we have cross sections that are kind of detail what these various roads will include. So for Commons Drive, which is the street that's running down the center, that's really going to be the main focus for pedestrian and bicycle traffic. You're going to have a 6-foot bike lane on either side running alongside Commons Drive, and then a 15-foot sidewalk with a 5-foot tree pit. So plenty of space for pedestrians and cyclists, and then narrower travel lanes at 10 feet apiece. And that's one way in each direction along Commons Drive. Haycock Road, they also have a wider cross section planned. So on the side fronting the city's property, they're looking at a 10.5-foot sidewalk with a 6.5 approximately foot tree pit. And then on Route 7, again, a wider sidewalk at about 13.5 feet, at a 5-foot landscape strip.
Can I hold you up for a moment?
Go ahead.
There appeared, Rob, do you have a question clarification that you want to make? I'm just trying to get questions. If you have a comment, we can just hold them for a moment.
Question, yeah. I
Yes.
mean, the route, so where Route 7 intersects with Haycock, I can't quite tell from the image, but it looks to be 8 lanes across in front of the McDonald's, between the McDonald's and the new development. I think right now it's 7 lanes. And for me, as a walker, pedestrian, I don't feel safe crossing there. And from the plans I've seen, it looks like that is going to become 8 lanes wide.
Correct. If you,
which is,
if you, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you account for the turn lanes, correct. So they would be adding a through lane on westbound Route 7.
Yeah.
The key difference there is that they are also intending to move in the crosswalks. So right now, the crosswalks, I think on all four legs, are sort of bunched in towards the center of that intersection. They would be moving them out more towards where the stop bar is. So if you look at it, I have another image I could pull up or send to you all. But what that effectively does is the actual crossing distance for a pedestrian is roughly the same. It might even actually be less by moving the location of that crosswalk, even when adding that additional westbound lane.
Well, I just want to voice concern. I mean, you know, Route 7, Broad Street, in most places in the city of Falls Church is a 4 lanes to cross, and it feels safe as a walker. And as such, people walk and people bike and they feel safe to cross Route 7, and it's comfortable. But right there at that intersection, that to me is not a safe crossing, and I don't see any improvement, right? There's no island proposed, and it just feels like too many lanes of traffic, and so that's a concern for me, and I think a lot of people voiced that concern on the call a couple weeks ago, that like and if you're trying to have people walk to this development, that's going to be the main place where people cross from our neighborhood over to that new development. So it just feels too wide. I mean, maybe it can't be changed, but to me that just feels like not pedestrian friendly, not active transportation friendly.
Sure. And you know, that's part of this study too. If we need to look at you know, making some sort of improvements at this intersection, I will mention as part of this slide that the city was awarded $15 million of NBTA grant to improve these intersections. So the one that you noted, but also to include a hawk signal up where the orange circle is, so allowing folks to more comfortably cross at that location, and then signalizing where you see Mustang Alley at the top and Haycock Road. Now, as far as getting across Route 7, there's also a proposed signalized intersection where you see Commons Drive meet up with Chestnut Street. And as was mentioned, I think last time or in the community meeting, that location at Chestnut Street would be shifted over to align with Commons Drive.
Yeah, and I noticed that, and that's great. That one's still pretty wide too, though, 7 or maybe 8 lanes. I can't tell exactly from the picture, and it doesn't appear to be an island there either. So, you know, again, similar concern about crossing there, but you know, I've voiced my concern. Other people may have comments.
Okay, thanks, Rob. I just want to make sure we get some, if they're just clarifying questions, we can do it. If they're comments, we have the quadrants we're going to go around, but if there's a question, we're try to get them clarified now. So Cheryl.
Okay. Do we actually know, looking at this, Tim, and I think it's a little unfair that you're doing the Falls Church City presentation, but this Commons Drive has been explained to those of us on our side of 66 that this is going to solve all of the traffic problems at the Haycock Route 7, current Haycock Route 7 interchange. I don't see this as a particularly attractive way for moving traffic away from Haycock and Route 7. So do you have a projection of how many vehicles are going to be actually turning into this development at that intersection vis-a-vis Haycock Road? Because ultimately a lot of them are still going to come back out on Haycock Road. So this is something that we've been asking for the better part of the last 2 years, and I think it's time that someone give us that data. So you don't have to do it tonight, and I think someone from Falls Church City should be explaining this, and I agree with everything Rob said and support whatever our friends on that side of Route 7 need to make that a safe crossing. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can pull that information from the TA and get that to you all.
And we'll confirm with the City of Falls Church. Mitch, your next clarifying question.
Yeah, thanks. So my question was just why that intersection isn't circled with Chestnut Commons crossing Route 7 there, and maybe because it's a Fairfax project versus a Falls Church project. I don't know, but I was wondering why it wasn't circled on this graphic. And then I'll also say that I agree with the prior comments. Intersections improvements wonderful. Adding section width and additional lanes and making them wider, not needed. Once you cross Haycock, it's 4 lanes.
Sure. So yeah, I wanted to explain that kind of bullet point below the $15 million grant, that's going towards those 3 circles there, as well as improving multimodal improvements, so wider sidewalks, undergrounding of utilities along Leesburg Pike and the Haycock Road frontages of that site. So the intersection that you're talking about, the Chestnut and Commons intersection, that's not included in that $15 million NBTA grant, but would be implemented as part of this project. The wider West Falls SESP project, that is. So kind of combine the two here in this slide.
Thanks, Tim. Let's keep moving.
And I did want to, before we move on, also note there's another $6.9 million NBTA grant, not noted on this slide, but I mentioned it a couple times, for a connection between not Shreve Road, the WNOD Trail and Route 7 along Shreve Road, which would be a 10-foot shared use path and a 6-foot planting strip, along with some pedestrian scale lighting. So that's another grant that's going to help sort of connect the WNOD Trail users to the metro. So we can move on from here. And really, this just shows the overview. Again, looking at Commons Drive, that long stretch coming out from Leesburg Pike, crossing over the Virginia Tech site, and then connecting to the Metro Access Road and eventually to Haycock and then the metro station itself. So there would be bike lanes along that whole portion from Leesburg Pike along Metro Access to Haycock Road. So that's just kind of the overall plan. And now this is kind of the meat of our presentation here. So this is a look at the pedestrian level of comfort map. And I've mentioned this metric a couple times, but this is something that we've really started to look at in Fairfax County, is how do we approach not just looking at vehicular metrics like LOS and volume to capacity and delay, but looking at it from a pedestrian standpoint, from a cyclist standpoint, and in terms of bicycle LTS, which we'll talk about momentarily. But this is something that we've kind of taken some thoughts from Montgomery County on. They've implemented this type of metric in their whole county, and they have a pretty robust map for that. But essentially what it is it's a point-based system that scores different sidewalks, segments of the roadway based on a number of variables, and I've listed those here. So we look at pathway width, we look at the posted speed limit of the adjacent roadway, any buffer, how wide the buffer is. If there's a striped parking lane, we take that into account because that provides an additional buffer for the pedestrian. Presence of street trees, a bike lane, whether or not there's a curb, and then from that, looking at the average daily traffic to see how much traffic flows might be affecting comfort levels. So we combine all those variables and then weight it equally, and we come out with a pedestrian level comfort score. So that ranges from very comfortable, which you see in that darker green, all the way down to the absence of a pathway, which is marked in red. So you can see in this overall map here, this is the 1 mile radius, what that looks like. And you notice there's unfortunately a lot of red and some of the residential areas close to the metro station. But there's a fair amount of yellow, which is satisfactory, and not, unfortunately, too much green. Now that's because of the nature of this area. I mean, a lot of these neighborhoods were built before we had some of these standards in place, some of these standards that we strive to now with wider sidewalks, with wider buffers. And so retrofitting, again, as we've talked about, is challenging, but hopefully this map, taking a look at it and looking at the network as it exists today, can help you in identifying some of the areas we might need to focus on. So we can go to the next slide. And essentially what I like to do here, we're going to go through the quadrants again. And you can see now the quadrants have the pedestrian level of comfort marked. And you can see it's on both sides of both sides of the roadway. So we have that marked for the entire study area here, as well as a lot of the recommendations that we've heard from you all and the community. And what I'd like to do when reviewing these 4 quadrants is enable the chat, have you add any clarifications that you might want to add to these recommendations. If there's any that we've missed, add those. But I'd like to use the chat feature if we can, so that we can better collect the recommendations and update these maps accordingly for our next round. But certainly if there's anything that you want to discuss, Sonia, I see you have your hand raised. Feel free to do that and note it in the chat. Sonia, you can go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. I feel like I have a lot of notes, and so I just was feeling a little concerned that I was going to be trying to pay attention and listen and also be typing in the chat. So I think in particular, we already sort of hashed out that intersection of Haycock, Route 7, and Shreve. And I, put in my notes already in the chat, like something better needs to be done there. Absolutely. I do want to make sure that the spot where we go under 66 along Route 7, I know that there's a couple of things. One, there's a sidewalk under there, and it really needs to be accessible for bicyclists as well. It needs to be a shared use path. It needs better lighting. And where those crossings at the ramps, I certainly appreciate, the addition of high vis crosswalks, but I'm thinking flashing beacons, making sure there is no free flow ramp. Like, can we stop traffic in some way? It's dangerous, and it needs to be more comfortable and really elevated in this process, because I think that's a huge barrier trying to come across 66 along Route 7. And Haycock's another section, so I'll pause on that one for now, but I'll just leave it at that. I think that 66 and Route 7 spot and the Haycock and Route 7 spot are really, really key spots that we need to take care of.
Sure, those are good thoughts. And the Route 7 portion you spoke of, dealing with those interchanges and the section underneath the bridge, we talked with our technical group about that. High visibility crosswalks certainly are appropriate there, and maybe even having the flashing beacons. Pete out said that may be an appropriate treatment. And then I have a slide towards the end. We have some other thoughts from our active transportation folks on how we might be able to, in the short term, improve that stretch with just some general maintenance, maybe with some placemaking with artwork under the bridge being an example, but maybe entering some sort of maintenance agreement to make that more appealing. Yeah, but good thoughts. Bruce, right?
Monitoring, just to let you know, Tim, I do, for everyone else, I am looking at the chat and we're pulling out the comments so that we can keep them by quadrant. So that way we know what you all are saying. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a quick clarifying question. Tim, did I hear you say that there's a grant, I forget how much, for bike lanes along Haycock from Shreve up to Route 7?
No, so there's a $6.9 million grant that the city had applied for and one from NVTA that connects the WNOD trail along Kirby Road to Route 7.
Did they receive that grant,
Yeah, so that's the funding for that is FY 2020 through 2025, I believe. But I believe they're working on the design starting in the spring. And I know Jeremy just raised his hand. He knows a lot about this, so he might be able to offer some information.
And just to add on to that, from route, that's great. So from Route 7, I guess it looks like there's a wide sidewalk, but it looks like cyclists would have to compete with pedestrians from there up to the metro, because there don't appear to be plans for bike lanes on Haycock from Route 7 up to metro.
Not
that right?
currently. Not currently. That the bike lanes would be planned along that Commons Drive,
Right.
connecting through Virginia Tech and through that middle portion.
So cyclists could potentially swing over there and head north.
Right.
All
Exactly.
right, thanks.
Jeremy, did you want to chime in on that?
And I had some other comments if you want me to go ahead and go with those. So on the bike thing, I think it is just so that I think that plan is funded for 2025, I think, around there. So it's still some time off. But I wanted to make a couple comments. First, I know that there is some planning related to the WDOD crossing. You mentioned some here, improve visibility, which I think is important, but not sufficient given the number of incidents at that bike crossing. I don't know. We have Nova Parks as part of the technical advisory group, but I mean, one of the highest incident intersections for bikes in the entire county, and we've been planning. There's been planning for this for 5 years. I mean, it's been very, very slow. We continue to have lots of incidents there. And so, if someone's on and then it wants to continue to push this forward, that's a huge priority that I think the county needs to focus on given the number of incidents there. I think we also need to balance, I would love to see sidewalks through this. This is my neighborhood here, through this neighborhood. I know lots of our neighbors would like to see that. I think the ability to get that done, given kind of the land use and kind of where trees are, I think is very, very difficult. And so, I don't know whether it's feasible or not. I would love to see it, but I think there needs to be kind of some consideration of like what all the alternatives are in this. I don't know if RTAP is going to be enough to try to address some of these issues. And I don't know whether sidewalks is going to be feasible to get into some of these neighborhoods, and maybe not even widening, giving some of the ditches that are along like Gordon's or Chestnut. So I think we need to be somewhat think out of the box on some of these issues. We're going to see, increasing traffic. The number one issue that I hear from my neighbors is the amount of traffic that we're going to see through our neighborhood given the new developments. We're going to have a new intersection at Chestnut, hopefully some improvements for traffic flows, but we're going to see an increase in the volume of traffic, and that just automatically flows into a neighborhood like Falls Hill that has very low comfort level and walkability, and that's very difficult to change by placing sidewalks. We've seen just in 10 years we've seen a double in the number of vehicle volume in our neighborhoods, and now we want to get people outside of their houses and walking to this new development. It seems like a huge challenge, and so I think maybe rely on the technical team here to think like, well, what are the other opportunities here besides sidewalks? If sidewalks are not possible, is there like a range of issues, opportunities that we can look at if speed humps maybe won't do it, but sidewalks are too much if there's other opportunities here. Thanks.
Hey, Jeremy, can I just ask something real quick? Is there something that you have seen in another neighborhood or through life experiences that you think might work? I'm just curious if you're asking us to kind of come back with some ideas of what might be available.
I'd like to see you come back. I don't know. I've seen, bike lanes painted within a street. I don't know if there's opportunities to limit kind of like where cars park to, using the width of streets. If you can't put in a sidewalk, I don't know.
Yep.
But open to your suggestions.
That's fine. I think what I would ask then is we'll bring back the ideas, but one idea that I'm going to make sure we broach with that group is what if we did directional flow in terms of the cars. What, instead of having allowed 2 directions on each street, what if we just allowed 1 direction so that we could add in other facilities, and kind of getting a feedback from the, from your neighbors in terms of, is that something that's palatable to them, would be something that would be helpful to us.
Yeah, I think those are good ideas to think about. Thanks.
Thank you both. And before we go on, I did want to mention a disclaimer here. With this map, again, this is a tool for you all to use. This is the first time we've tried doing this in the county. And with that, there's going to be growing pains. So if you disagree with one of the colors here, that's totally fine. If you think something should be an orange and not a green, for example, we'd appreciate your feedback on that, definitely, but really relying on your experiences to tell us, where to focus. This is just really to help kind of prioritize these recommendations. So I just wanted to mention that before we kind of continue on. Rob, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just piggyback on what Jeremy said. I totally agree. And, outside the box, on the other side of 7, it seems like some roads were terminated in places, right, where there was a lot of cut-through traffic. So I don't know where, there is a lot of cut-through traffic in Falls Hill. And so maybe this is something else to consider, is that some of these roads just kind of terminate and don't go all the way through, right? And I don't know what that process looks like, or how that gets approved by neighborhoods or whatever. But that also helps to improve walkability, when there's less kind of through traffic in terms of people speeding. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next quadrant? So here again, the focus of this section is mostly Idlewood Road in the northwest, and then Leesburg Pike kind of coming from the northwest into the metro station. You can see a lot more yellow in this area, especially the northern neighborhood there. We have a lot more sidewalk and buffer, but there's still some opportunities where we might be able to make some improvements, especially connecting along Route 7.
Okay, I didn't clear hands from last time, so I think Jeremy and Rob, I think you two had left your hands up. I'm going to drop them down, or unless you do. Okay, so we're good to go, Tim.
Okay. Oh, can we go back to the last slide, sorry? Mira, I think you're up.
Hi, yeah, on the previous one, I just had a question about so the filling in the sidewalk gaps along Idlewood Road, up, I think it's up between Stephanie Marie, going towards Lemon Road Elementary. I had discussed with our principal, we were talking about the Safe Routes to School program and trying to, get that started. She did have a question though, if those sidewalks, which she was very much on board with getting filled in, well, does that affect the bus that currently brings some of those kids? Would it take away a bus? That's her only concern. She wouldn't want it to eliminate the bus option for those kids currently, because it is still a little bit of a distance from Lemon Road. If those sidewalk gaps were filled, would that impact the number of buses that they're given?
Okay, sure. So that's a question I'll have to bring to schools and have them clarify. I don't want to think against that, but I can bring that to them.
This is Sally. That could happen, but elementary kids are within a mile. So it's a mile as you walk, not as a mile as a crow flies. But it's very, parents do get very upset if you take away a bus. So that's done with a lot of consideration. But again, it's the distance and the safety of the route that's looked at.
Okay, because right now there isn't a sidewalk, so they would have to zigzag through, which I think makes them outside the 1 mile.
Right. And what we always like to do is be able to give parents that choice, where if they felt it was safe and they wanted their child to walk, they could. And but the bus may still be provided because they're outside, but maybe they would be more inclined to bike because that's a nice route to bike if the sidewalks were there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Bruce Jones, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I have comments on two of the items. One is create accessible pedestrian route to Metro from Idlewood Road. The agenda for the technical group meeting last week indicated that that is one of the topics that will be discussed by the technical group. So I'd like to hear what was said about that last week.
Sure, we did spend quite a significant amount of time actually discussing that. I think I've noted in some past meetings the challenges with that. And of course, you all know needs, first of all, approval from WMATA to get through the rail yard. But we've heard from the community in the past about security concerns in doing that and making that connection. Not only that, but the cost is quite prohibitive. It would be in the tens of millions of dollars. Now, that being said, if that's something that the community really wants to see as a priority, instead of seeing Route 7 as the the main route into the metro, I think you should note that. But that being said, this is something that had been studied in the past. WMATA and FCDOT looked at this back in 2011 and did actually draw up some preliminary concepts about how that might be done. But there certainly would be a big cost element to that. And if we're looking to make some of these other improvements in other areas, that would obviously eat a big chunk of it. So it is something that we discussed. It is something that I think, especially from WMATA's side, they're a bit skeptical on if we could get it done. But that being said, it is in the comprehensive plan. It is something that you could see a benefit in not only shortening the route for folks, but you're eliminating the amount that people from Idlewood Road or points north have to cross. If you're walking around along Route 7, as we've already noted, you have to cross several on and off ramps by the interchange. So certainly benefits, and I think it's up to this group to kind of weigh those against what could be a pretty large cost.
Tim, actually, I was the president of the Lebanon Road Civic Association back in 2011, 2012, when that study was done. And I got an email from Supervisor Faust saying that this is just too expensive. And the only possible route, because of the security concerns, was a fishhook shape, which involved building a path along the northern slope where the Interstate 66 highway goes west, and there's a slope on the right side of the highway, and you would have to carve the path into that hillside because, as you said, WMATA will not allow people through the rail yard. So I actually have been aware of what you just said, but I'm glad we've mentioned that this evening because I think it's important for other members of the advisory group to be aware of that information. My other comment is about clear vegetation on corner of Red Road and Idlewood Road to improve visibility. Now, if there's a situation where there's vegetation blocking the view, that is actually a county code violation. There's the county code, they have a flyer, I'll just put it up momentarily, called site distance obstructions on corner lots. So if there's a vegetation problem, you can file a complaint online with the DCC and it'll get taken care of. The problem at that corner, it's not actually vegetation, it's the land itself. There's an embankment there. And the only way you can improve visibility would be to bring in a bulldozer and regrade the land. So the description there of that project concept is really correct. Those are the end of my comments.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. We can clarify that one, certainly. And then Bruce Wright, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Wanted to just, I guess, piggyback on the last comment that the importance of that connection from Idlewood. When I was on the Trails Committee in the early 2000s, this was being discussed. I think an extension of Red Road into the rail yard or somehow avoiding the rail yard. And I agree it's expensive, but it would avoid those ramps, those high-speed ramps on Route 7 that are going to be really hard to overcome. One way to overcome those ramps is to provide grade separation, but that's also expensive. So I think this crossing could be really important. Now, the caveat is, as you can see from that comfort level map, it doesn't look like there's a connection to Pimmit Drive. And if those folks in that whole Pimmit area can't flow in to this area at that connects Idlewood, then it's a less valuable connection. So if you could connect Red Road, it looks like, to that little orange cul-de-sac off of Pimmit Drive, it would be a much more valuable connection. And maybe a separate grant application could be made. And it looks like Bruce Jones has some comments regarding that comment. But anyway, that's my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, he beat me to it. So there is actually a TPP project to make that connection. So one thing I can do for the next set of maps is I can include all those TPP projects, maybe in a different color, or call those out so we can see kind of the whole picture. But there is, there's given consideration to that connection.
Thanks.
And then Bruce Jones, did you have another comment on this one? Okay.
Yes. In view of what the previous speaker just said, I think it might be useful if you could post the Toole consultant study. That's TOOLE, the Toole consultant study from 2011. You could post that on the project website so that people will be familiar with why that would be such a, it would be a very expensive project. And also because of the fishhook configuration and being on the slope of the interstate highway, it would be a rather unattractive pedestrian route. Going back to the Red Road thing, as there is an existing project in the TPP to provide a pedestrian bridge across the stream for pedestrians and bicyclists. But both the Lemon Road Civic Association area and the adjoining Pimmit Hills have never wanted a vehicular connection there because we don't want to encourage cut-through traffic from Tyson's. We want to keep the commuter traffic on Route 7. So the idea is to have a connection for pedestrians and cyclists only, but not for vehicles.
Yep, that's an important clarification. Thanks, Bruce. Okay, I think we can move on to the third one. So now we're looking at Kirby Road, and then this road running from north-south is obviously Great Falls Street, and then a portion of Haycock Road. So if anybody has comments on this quadrant, feel free to post those in the chat, and if you want to discuss any of those, go ahead and raise your hand and we can talk through them.
Just for everyone's sake, I'm just letting everyone who's on this call know we're taking the AG member comments. There is a public comment at the end of this meeting. If there's a particular point that you want to make as part of the public, we'll see if there's an opportunity. We're trying to keep on schedule, but we'll see if we can kind of get you in. All right, go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Cheryl Sim, go ahead.
Am I? Okay, I'm having terrible computer connectivity issues today, so I'm trying to use the chat, but it's just not turning out for me. at that Haycock Great Falls intersection, I put in the chat that is a very uncomfortable intersection, and it should be dark orange, not green. And it really does need sidewalks and crosswalks, especially with the development. So I really want to, I flagged this at almost every meeting, and I'm going to flag it again. It really needs to be looked hard at. I know maybe Mike Lindinger put in the chat about Westmoreland. Maybe someone can give us an update on where things stand on the implementation of the Westmoreland corridor study, including the crosswalk up by Longfellow Middle School. As for construct sidewalk on one side of Beacon Lane, I live on Beacon Lane, and there's probably one person, the person who's talking right now, who fully supports sidewalks. The neighbors really do not want sidewalks on Beacon Lane. The residents of Beacon Lane don't. So I know people have raised this, but I'm thinking of so much opposition on the street. It's probably something that I wouldn't rate very, very highly. And then again, the crosswalk from Casemont over to the north side of Haycock is something that is really important to the community. And I know people have asked about that on previous occasions. And we also need to look harder at Great Falls. On the west side of Great Falls, we have multiple families living there with young children, and they have no way to safely cross the street to get to Haycock Elementary School. So again, as I proposed last time, I think we need to look at adding a crosswalk from the one side of Moley across Great Falls to the other side. And then finally, people in the neighborhood and the greater community have discussed the need to lower the speed limit on Great Falls coming out of Falls Church City. And I hope at some point we can discuss that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. And that's a good reminder. I do have a slide coming up that kind of talks about speed limits. And then you mentioned the crossing at Haycock and Great Falls and how that should be orange. So one thing that this doesn't take into account is the actual crossing. So really that green is just looking at the trail along Haycock Road. Just wanted to clarify that.
Just to let you, sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm sorry, Tim, but you were with me, and at that point at Haycock and Great Falls on the north, I guess I would call it the northeast corner, the asphalt is literally 4 inches away from the right turn lane, the right turn to go north on Great Falls. It's a minor point, but I really don't think anyone should paint that line or color that line there, that area green. It's extremely dangerous.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's looking at the entire segment. So one thing I can do is maybe break that up and show a different color there, but that's a good comment. I think, let me see who's next. Michael, I believe you're next.
Hey guys, everybody. To be honest, I've had some feedback from the folks in my community. I don't know if they've sent you their thoughts as well. A lot of this has kind of been mentioned, the Casemont, the Hutchinson Street one. There's a few other ones. So I tried to identify ones that weren't already on the map there. As Cheryl kind of mentioned, I'm not aware of a Westmoreland traffic study, but essentially right where kind of in the dead center of Westmoreland between Haycock and Kirby, where the red is on those sidewalks, I think that's going into the a subdivision next in between the nursing home and Rodith. Some sort of crosswalk right kind of in the middle, because everyone's saying it's too far to walk to Kirby or Haycock to go to Longfellow if you're right dead center in the middle. So given that there is an actual subdivision right there in the middle that's basically right on the 1 mile radius, it seems like it's a good solution. Part and parcel with that, I've heard, putting speed bumps along Westmoreland. I don't know if that's part of the same study. I don't know if there's a way to put a speed bump closer to Longfellow and Haycock and then a crosswalk I'm sorry, speed bumps closer to Longfellow and Haycock, and then the crosswalk in the middle. That would seem to substantially slow down traffic and make it much safer on Westmoreland, given the thousands of kids walking around there every day. I second the comments about Great Falls and Haycock, and then, there's a lot of red on the one side of Haycock, and this kind of goes to the Casemont Drive point. I mean, basically on the Haycock, on the school side, it's all green, but on the other side, it's basically all red, if not yellow. And so there's been multiple requests, I think, to have some sort of crosswalk from the other side, the non-school side of Haycock. I guess that's the south side of Haycock. Going across, and again, kind of maybe a speed bump there as well to slow some stuff down.
Go.
Let me just say, I think that's what I don't want to take up other folks' time. And Tim, I can draft up my email in a more detailed fashion. I wanted to cover some of the major parts that folks have sent me along, but I'll reserve my time, I guess, for the next meeting to talk about some other things in detail.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Mike.
I'm
And yeah,
going to hop in here real quick. Tom, our director, says he can briefly talk about the crosswalk to Longfellow Middle School for the group.
So there is a funded project to put a crosswalk in at a pedestrian crossing at Hope, which is right there by the middle school. We do have a design for that that's in progress right now, and we are looking to have some community meetings about that later on this spring. So that is in progress, and it is something that is funded and moving forward. So did want to let people.
You were kind of breaking up there. I'm sorry. What was the cross street? Is that where the red is? The sidewalks
Hopewood.
Where the red is, or was it?
The cross street is Hopewood. So
Hopewood,
it's just
okay.
outside of this the circle, so just above that area. So it's not colored right now,
Okay.
but it's right here by the middle school.
Is that the one that feeds into all those townhomes on the right-hand side?
Yes.
Okay.
So that would break up and have a crossing between Kirby and Haycock, kind of in the middle there, right by the school.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom. And Michael, yeah, some folks from the AG have already sent me some comments via email too, and certainly others. Feel free to do that if you can't get them all into chat. This was really just to kind of have the discussion going during this meeting, but if you have other comments or recommendations, please feel free to email those to me. As far as the Westmoreland corridor study, that is noted in our scope of work, and I believe there's a link to it there. But in any case, I can send a link to that study as well, so you all can take a look at that. And I think if there's nothing else, we can move on to the fourth quadrant. So again, this is looking at Great Falls Street, the southern portion as it extends towards the city of Falls Church, and then Haycock Road, of course, as it extends towards the metro station. So any comments, discussion points on this slide? I do, Bruce, I'll take yours in just a minute. I did want to mention, before I forget, there was a question posed to the technical group about the slope of the pathway that you can see as the green line sort of transitions to orange around Turner Avenue on Haycock Road. There's a question on the slope and whether or not that's ADA appropriate. And so we posed that question to our technical group. So the requirement, at least for trails that run alongside a roadway, is that the trail cannot be at a different grade. If the trail's at a higher grade than the roadway, as long as it's running alongside at the same grade, it's fine. It can follow the same slope. It's when it sort of veers off and becomes its own separate trail that you have and 8.3% requirements in terms of grade to meet. So with that being said, I did a rough measurement using an elevation map in GIS, and it does appear that the slope at that particular section of the pathway is between 4 and 5%. Now, all that being said, if folks still feel that it's something that needs to be addressed, it is a recommendation that you would like included in this plan. And certainly if you know folks who are wheelchair bound or have trouble with accessing this trail and accessing the metro station, and you want to include it as a recommendation, that's fine. But just in terms of an ADA requirement, this would meet that.
Michael has a.
Michael, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal Leah Socha's thunder. I think she had her hand raised from the prior slide. I just want to make sure she's gotten her questions answered. I don't know if she just forgot to lower her hand, but.
No, thank you. Actually, it's applicable to this chart too. So I would just ask that we consider what is the value of having or scoring a sidewalk as yellow when it falls in between a series of red that essentially doesn't allow anyone using that sidewalk to actually move or transport from one section to another. And I'm one of there's 3 houses on the, I guess it's the south or west side of Great Falls, where there's like a small section of sidewalk in front of my house that leads to a cul-de-sac on Moley, and then there's no sidewalk on either side. So I can't traverse Great Falls Street. If based on this, I can go from my house to my neighbor's house on Moley Drive and back safely, but I can't go into Falls Church City without illegally crossing Great Falls. I can't go in further into like the area that's going to be under development without illegally crossing Great Falls. So I recognize that by the scoring, yes, I have a sidewalk. Yes, I have what I'm from Cleveland. We call it a tree lawn, which is that little area of grass between the sidewalk and the curb. And yes, I have a parking lane, but that doesn't help me actually traverse the neighborhood. So I would just like to ask if we could reassess. That's yellow by the metrics, but from a utility or even more importantly, a safety standpoint, it's nothing. That provides no use to the community on our side. But also I think we see it trying to just walk into Falls Church City, where we have to illegally cross to get to one side of Falls Church, walk halfway up and then cross all the way down at West Street. But the folks on the other side of 66 are in the same boat, where they're either going to walk further away from the development to safely cross Great Falls, or we've got to look at a way to expand that sidewalk. So I will pop off of my soapbox. I just find it interesting that when you look at it, it's yellow, which means it's satisfactory, but the utility of that short area of sidewalk is very small.
Sure. And just so everybody knows, we did want to save public comment till the end so we can have the advisory group discussion. But I do want to address that point because it is a good point. You're looking at this map, and that's something you call out is, do these actually connect to anything? Some of these yellow portions, as Leah mentioned. So that's another hopefully useful way of using this map, is not only looking at the actual facility, which is this rating, but looking at the overall network. And when you look at the overall network, she's absolutely right. Some of these sidewalks don't actually connect to that overall network. So another thing to sort of look at when you're reviewing these maps and making your recommendations. I think we had Sonia up next.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I guess so. For the stretch of Haycock, I wanted to sort of suggest, I think I saw that there were recommendations to improve the bridge coming towards the Metro Access Road. I don't have it pulled up in front of me. So, but from the bridge from the Metro Access down to the city line, I think it would really be well served to do some traffic calming in there. It's a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, but it's pretty wide. And so for one thing, I think we do need to think about how bicyclists are going to move along Haycock. because it connects to the WNOD, and folks aren't going to want to go up Commons Drive to go through the metro stuff to come back down through that intersection. They're going to want to ride along Haycock. Right now, it's just a sidewalk. I saw that, we haven't got to it yet, but there were plans for a shared use path on the north side of Haycock between the metro access and Fair Falls Church Drive, the other signal there. But that's not there now. I don't know how quickly that will get in place. So I do think we need to think about connecting for bicyclists traveling along Shreve, across, and down Haycock. And also think about the comfort for people crossing. Now, Falls Church City is putting in some crossing improvements, but let's think about what we can do in our stretch in Fairfax County. And so where we do have signalized crossings, can we narrow that crossing by sort of reducing some of the lane widths, providing pedestrian medians, making it calmer, more comfortable for people trying to get across there? That spread between those two lights is still pretty far, but if people are going to the metro, those are the places they're going to go. Oh, and I think the other thing I noticed is if Falls Church City is running bike lanes up Grove, and if we consider doing something along Grove, we should think about how bicyclists are going to move and cross Haycock from Grove going towards the metro station. Because again, there's just sidewalks on that side of Haycock. So just think about how that bicyclist will flow through there. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Good comments. Bruce Jones, you're up.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the section of Haycock by Turner, the wording of the project here is widen pathway and decrease slope along north side of Haycock Road. Is it going to be possible for the slope to be decreased without modifying the intersection of Haycock and Turner?
It likely wouldn't be. This is, again, something that was put in as a recommendation, and I've taken these recommendations not only from the community meetings and the AG meetings, but also from what we covered in a past meeting, the Active Fairfax Barriers to Access Map. So certainly if there are ones that you feel are not feasible or not appropriate and we shouldn't put forward, that's good to know too. And we can remove those or adjust them as necessary.
No, I'm asking you if it's feasible to reduce the slope.
I'm sure it's feasible. It's just probably going to cost a lot of money to do that. And is it worth it? Is it the benefit that you get from doing that, knowing that it does meet the ADA requirement? Is that benefit outweighing the cost and the effort to do that? But that's really for you all to decide if you want to prioritize that.
I also have a question about the bridge over Interstate 66. The resolution passed by the board of the MCA called for widening of the sidewalk there. One reason that it's uncomfortable now or unfriendly to pedestrians is because the sidewalk is narrow. The wording here refers to a road diet, which in my understanding usually refers to painting lines on the street. So should I interpret the wording here as meaning that widening of the sidewalk over the bridge is not being proposed?
It certainly can be proposed. In discussing with our technical group, that is something that the county hasn't really done before. We're looking at doing that as part of the I-495 Next project. There's a bridge along Old Dominion Drive that crosses I-495, and what I've heard is that's really the first time we're looking at taking an existing bridge and sort of retrofitting it with a wider sidewalk. So that's going to be sort of a test case to see how well that goes, and how the engineering for that works out. That's not to say we couldn't try that here if we see that as being necessary, but I was thinking that maybe an easier approach might be, as Sonia kind of alluded to, if there's a wide cross section as you go beyond the bridge, and even including the bridge, of course, it's 4 lanes, and then going down south to the City of Falls Church, it's rather wide, and so perhaps maybe a road diet using paint instead of having to actually widen the sidewalk in the short term might be a better solution. Now, with that, with a road diet, there's obviously some traffic analysis that needs to be done, operational analysis to make sure that a road diet would work and that traffic could be carried along the road if you're decreasing the lanes. But that's just one solution. And if we want to stick with, we want a wider sidewalk alongside the bridge, and the advisory group wants to see that recommendation put forward, we can certainly do that as well.
I would just
add that Cheryl and Mark and I did a fair amount of consultation with local residents and community members in coming up with the wording of the recommendations that appeared in the NCA resolution, including a wider sidewalk on the bridge. So that is something that the community wants.
Okay.
Okay, understood. And I just want to point out one thing. So there's a structural engineering component to it. So when you put extra concrete on the bridge to widen the sidewalk, they have to go through a structural analysis. So that's kind of why Tim mentioned that the test case of the Old Dominion Bridge over I-45 is where they're going through and doing that sort of analysis to see what kind of widening the sidewalk can be. So what we were trying to do is give this group options to consider. So it's, yes, that is something, if we want to widen the sidewalk, we want to go through the structural analysis, that's what we want. The other option is, can we look at the road and see where's unneeded kind of area for cars and turn that back over to peds and bikes and have that kind of be an area and look to try to see what we can do to kind of create the barrier needed to make them feel safe. All right, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Okay, Michael, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just had a thought, given Bruce had some good points, and then the structural comments got me thinking. My background, I was an engineer in a prior life, and it got me thinking, has anyone considered, rather than, I guess, retrofitting and adding to the existing bridge, couldn't you just build a bike or walk pathway? And I'm looking at the map, it's the WOND trail. It's the thing that goes over Lee Highway or Langston Boulevard now, near Fairfax Drive, more kind of in downtown Falls Church. And, it could be like basically right next to the bridge. And that way there's no even consideration, or, it's much, much safer, because the people riding their bikes or walking, they're not even going to be by cars. The whole trail or the whole lane would be completely a separate structure from the bridge, and you wouldn't have to retrofit it. You wouldn't have to pour concrete. You wouldn't have to do any of that analysis. All you'd have to do is do an analysis to kind of, again, I don't know what the house is there as far as, the space and the property and everything like that. I guess looking at the map, you'd probably have to put it on the south side versus the north side maybe. But to me, that's an easier workaround and is much safer. And there's just such a densely populated amount of houses and neighborhoods on the east side of 66 that the whole point is to get these people to this new development. And they're not all going to be driving. They're going to be walking or riding their bikes. So wouldn't it make sense to have a dedicated bike or walk pathway over 66 where people don't even have to worry about cars? They just go. I mean, you might get worried about getting hit with a bicycle. Okay. Hopefully people are careful that way, but it's not a 2-ton box of metal.
Sure. I think that would definitely be the most comfortable solution. However, property impacts we need to consider that, of course, and then the cost of doing something like that. I think we'd really need to consider the feasibility of a project like that. And if you're looking at the south side, that's a kind of a whole nother problem that we're looking to address potentially in the study is there's no sidewalk. So what are you connecting to? You'd have to build a connection on the south side of Haycock, on the other side of Route 66, and connecting over to the, there is some sidewalk on the portion, the west side of 66, but there'd be a lot to consider in a project like that, certainly.
Well, to me, that's even more support. I mean, if there's no sidewalk on the south side now, then that should get rolled up into the entire consideration. But I get that it's not free, and I get that wouldn't be cheap to do. But to me, retrofitting a decades-old bridge, I guess trying to somehow add on to the side is just, to me, would be just much harder than to build something from scratch that is right next to it. I don't know. That's just me.
Michael, that's a good point. I think what we can do is let's take all the options for crossing over I-66, the idea of a ped bike bridge that's built separately, the widening of the sidewalk on the bridge, some other forms that have been mentioned, and let's pull them all together for the group to kind of consider. So that way you all can kind of see them parallel. Because I think it might be hard for you all to kind of like visualize or kind of understand them without them being like right next to each other, for you all to kind of have a better sense.
Yeah, and that'll be the next part of this, is really getting all these ideas together in a list, having it a little more digestible, and then you all can kind of take a look at prioritizing that. We can move on to Mark. I believe you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just quickly, can you describe what road diet means on the bridge? I know that it might involve closing the lane. And would that extend from the east end of the bridge all the way to the access road? What have you guys sketched out with in your thoughts on this? I want to have a pit. What's the picture look like? And it fits in obviously to what we've just discussed. Just a quick synopsis of what that means.
Sure. So there are a couple options. One would be the more straightforward. You have 4 lanes going across the bridge. That narrows to 2 as you're traveling northeast. And then as you travel towards the metro station, again, that continues, and then you have turn lanes that enter into the equation. So the idea, at least sort of the easier solution potentially, would be to just take away a lane in each direction on the bridge. So narrow the roadway on the bridge portion leading up to Metro Access Road to allow for more space for potentially a bike lane, or just having a wider buffer for the pedestrian crossing that facility. If you go beyond that and you start looking at the approaches to intersections, and then as you get closer in towards the city where you have more traffic considerations, you would need to do an operational analysis and take more into consideration if you're going to do a road diet there, because of having
I'm only talking about the bridge to the access road, and that clarified it. I would suggest that you consider a road diet on the other Route 66 bridge.
Great Falls.
On Great Falls for similar considerations, and Leah talked eloquently about this. The sidewalks or pseudo sidewalks on that bridge are the same as they are on the Haycock Bridge. So that's something, if it's not expensive and can be engineered, because there the strange thing is Great Falls is 2-lane, Great Falls on the bridge is 4 lanes, and then Great Falls continues as 2 lanes.
Right.
It's a candidate for I'd ask that be added to the list. Again, assuming it's not a huge cost or engineering challenge, and it might also have a benefit of slowing the people down a bit that are racing north-south on that stretch from the city line.
Sure. I think that's a good comment.
Thank you.
And Bruce Jones, do you have another comment? No. Okay. It looks like we have Robert Boggs.
Hello. I think it's quite obvious. So I represent the southeastern quadrant.
Robert, if you're talking, we can't really hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, that's a little better. It's a little muffled though.
Okay, sorry. I've got to get my hardware squared away here. I think it's obvious from the map, the southwestern quadrant here, that there are really no good pedestrian routes from the people who live in my neighborhood, Ellison Heights and Mount Daniel, down to the Haycock and area and so forth. Of course, for bicycling, Highland Avenue is not very good, just given the topography. It's quite a slog. So anyone who would be bicycling from my neighborhood toward the development, toward the metro, would probably jog down to Grove, and that's not very good either. So I will be making it clear later to you that we've got to emphasize bike routes using Grove Avenue. But another issue I wanted just to underscore was what Cheryl said earlier about the so-called Commons Drive. I've heard it described from two different sides. I've heard Evan speak several times, giving the EYA spiel about how the common road was going to siphon off all kinds of traffic and alleviate congestion at the Route 7 Haycock intersection. He was even able to talk about by how many seconds the turn around that intersection would be reduced, which of course is ludicrous. But I've been hearing what the city has to say about the Commons Drive. It's clear that they have a totally different conception and basically a contradictory one, which is to emphasize pedestrian and bicycle traffic, which I think is the right way. I really think that the whole notion that somehow having an interior road parallel to Haycock is going to substantially reduce traffic on Haycock, I think it's really spurious, and I would be more comfortable to see a new traffic projection done than the one we seem to be operating under. But anyway, I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
And I know we're running short on time here, so I want to get at least to take a look at the.
Hey, Tim, before we do this, let's go ahead and take the public comments because some of them have been kind of sitting on the side and they want to be able to kind of be heard, and then we can finish up the presentation. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. All right. So I know Kathy Pippin you've been waiting patiently. Thank you. If you can unmute yourself, please do so.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, I got pain on my arm raising it up. All right, I have a question about the last slide. I apologize. I'm actually not able to see the map now on my computer. All difficulties. But so I've spoken up about concerns for years in the past few meetings, at least regarding K-Smart, Haycock. And I know that several folks have mentioned that. So that's great that it's on record again. But two things I wanted to point. One is that from the Haycock Great Falls intersection, you're driving toward Haycock School. Okay, that is a downhill. Could we put some sort of a slowing down, flashing light, calming traffic as folks are driving toward school on Haycock after they have passed Great Falls Road? That's one issue because several years, we've involved the police department, and sure enough, they actually did come and ticketed some folks, and they would put a decoy vehicle there in the right by Casement. There's a little dip in the road, I guess, and so that worked a little bit, but that was it, just only for a few weeks, and people are speeding down. So that, in addition to the proposal about a crosswalk connecting the Casement to Haycock, especially the side of non-school side that does not have a sidewalk currently. Now, although the part of it closer to the Haycock, to the Great Falls, does have some sort of a cross pedestrian sidewalk, but it's really narrow and it's really not efficient. So that's my suggestion and my request there, my concern with that. The other thing is that folks who live on Moley, so Haycock, Casement, you have Beacon right next to it, then you have Moley. Moley has only one side of it that is got a sidewalk. Now, how are those folks who live on that side, Moley, Tulip, and all the other streets, I can't remember their name now, can come to this beautiful development that is going to be built? So when they come in, they have to come through probably directly going straight up to Moley, intersecting to the Great Falls, or come through Casement to get to Haycock and go up to Great Falls at that intersection and go on to the metro. So that intersection of Casement and Moley, it's pretty wide and it has only 2 stops. It's not a 4-way stops. So that would be something that I also would request to take a look at that and provide a safe, maybe a 4-stop and a side crosswalk for those people who live on that side.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. And we're gonna next up is Teresa Zemmelman. I think I'm gonna mess up your name. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I am one of the people who live on Great Falls Street. I am a parent of 4 small children who will be attending Haycock, and we have no way to safely cross Great Falls Street to get to school. We have been promised a bus. Our bus is constantly late, and so we are crossing guards in the morning trying to get our kids across the street safely with cars speeding by. And it's terrifying. It's so disappointing to see that there are no recommendations for extending the sidewalk along Great Falls Street south of Haycock. I don't see any improvements listed on this slide at all. And I'm just really disappointed because we have little kids and it's really dangerous. So if there's anything that could possibly be done, I would encourage the advisory group to make those recommendations, please.
Thanks for your comment, Teresa. And just to clarify, this is kind of an initial list we're developing. So certainly if there's other recommendations or changes we want to make, or the advisory group wants to make, they should consider those. And Mike, was that it for the public comment?
That's it. And we can go ahead and finish off, Tim.
Okay. So we can go to the next slide. I know we're past time here, so I'll go through these quickly. And what we can do is, I've already asked you all in the email I sent out a couple days ago for your comments on where you want to see priorities for the 1 mile radius. But also, if you could send me your comments on the larger bike network. So this first slide here is showing the countywide trails plan, and this is really the intent of this is to show that in terms of our long range plans, there are plans to connect this West Falls area. There's a pretty extensive network, as you can see from the red line shown. And so that's something to consider when you're looking at the next slide in terms of making recommendations where you want to see these bicycle connections prioritized. So we can go to the next slide. And this next slide shows the Bike Fairfax map, and there's a link in the top right corner. But this essentially shows the level of traffic stress or level of comfort for cyclists. And again, disclaimer with this, as I mentioned with the pedestrian level of comfort tool, it's a tool, it's not a perfect one. And so if you disagree with any of the lines here, certainly you can raise those disagreements. But really, this is just to show where the network stands today in terms of stress for cyclists. You see the green lines are the lower stress facilities, and the gray lines are those higher stress facilities, as you can see running down Leesburg Pike, Haycock Road, and Shreve Road, as we know, Great Falls Street as well. So this is sort of just a way to identify where we think the priorities might be, or the major recommendations might be for connecting cyclists to the West Falls Church Metro Station. But if you have other thoughts about other connections or other areas that you would like us to focus our attention on, really would appreciate those thoughts. And if you could just email those to me, we can roll those into these recommendations as well. And it looks like Mira, you have a question. I can take that real quick.
Just to go, so the green lines are what is existing? Is that what you're saying?
Sure. So this is a look at existing conditions. And again, not perfect. I know we've mentioned in the past that you can kind of see the green line extending from Idlewood to the metro station across the rail yard. Obviously, that's.
Because I don't think they can access it, right?
No. It's not a connection.
I just wanted to clarify it.
Right. That's just a part of this map that was created a few years ago. But yeah, certainly it's not a perfect tool, but I think it is useful in showing where some of the areas that are higher stress are and where we might be able to focus our attention. So just something to consider. Jeremy, you had a question too?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the bike master plan, just for context, because we dealt with this on Shreve Road. I think part of the master plan includes a lane down Shreve Road, but then it was rejected because there wasn't enough room as part of the repaving. And so, I think that's part of my frustration with when we talk about sidewalks and stuff and all of this planning is, some consideration of the feasibility, because I think there was some expectation as part of the plan that perhaps there would be a bike lane there, but then when we got there, it wasn't possible.
Sure, and part of that too is, I mentioned the active Fairfax plan, and what that's looking at is kind of consolidating, synchronizing, and really updating the guidance for bikes and peds, combining the countywide trails plan with the bicycle master plan. And in many cases, the countywide trails plan supersedes the guidance in the bicycle master plan. So where we might, in the past have thought a bike lane was appropriate for Shreve Road, for example, really we would be looking at a shared use path, a facility that's off street as opposed to having cyclists on Shreve Road. And that is included in the countywide trails plan. So that's just something to note. Mark, you had a question as well?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. You've got bike lanes along Haycock Road from Turner to the Metro Access Road, and we talked about the bridge diet thing. How would a bicyclist get to Turner Avenue to take advantage of that bike lane? Things are somewhat fragmented here. It doesn't make sense it'd help people that live down off Turner and Grayson Place, but
Sure.
Would
So,
there be widening of the path from along Haycock from Great Falls? So it's a pretty disastrous situation as far as bikes along Great Falls, along Haycock, feeding into that point. I know that it's a huge challenge. I'm just stating it because there's nothing on this Bike Fairfax map about that problem.
sure.
You know,
So these are just
what is to be done?
Sure. So these are just recommendations. So that the text boxes are things that I added on to this map. They're not actually part of the Bike Fairfax map, but recommendations that I'd sort of added on to consider. Now, if there's any that need to be changed or clarified, this one, for example, we can do that. That's really up to you all to make those recommendations. But I think the thinking there for Haycock would be that you'd use the path, the existing path along the north side of Haycock to connect to any bike lane that would be proposed alongside the bridge. And then, as I showed with the West Falls Church plans, connecting to the bike lanes along the Metro Access Road through Commons Drive. So that could be one potential enhancement to the bike network. But of course, if
Hey,
you guys
Tim,
have other thoughts, we can change.
Tim, sorry to be impatient here, but I think we've stated many times that bicycling along Haycock is impossible for many people at least, particularly from Great Falls to the Metro Access Road. So I will recommend that if there's not space on the road to add a bike lane, and it would be dangerous at that point, is that you add to this to widen the path, improve the path from Great Falls to Turner to enable bicyclists and pedestrians to both use that path. So it's an obvious problem, and that's one solution. And the same could be said about the stretch of the path, which is a little better, from Great Falls over to Westmoreland. Again, sorry to be impatient about this, but I think we've repeated this concern during this, in written comments, during the comprehensive plan amendment process. And you're looking to us to suggest that we need to do, if accessibility by foot and bike is a goal here for this development, there's a lot that needs to be done from the access road going east along Haycock and Great Falls. And I'll send you a more detailed list. Again, I apologize for my impatience, but I want to be clear on what this is showing, and you've clarified that. It's notional, the bubbles. So this needs to be fleshed out. Thanks again.
Yep.
Sorry to bark at you.
Oh, that's all right. I'm not sure who was up next. Bruce, maybe.
Yeah, just a quick comment. This is the existing conditions, and there is a bicycle master plan that does show recommended facilities. And I just looked at it, and along Haycock from Turner, from Great Falls up to the bridge, it only shows sharrows, which are shared lane markings, which are really insufficient for that section. But the other point is that this is all being revised right now, and that this group can weigh in on that. And I think our recommendations will probably feed into that process.
Right. Yeah. That a lot of the guidance in that bicycle master plan is sort of out of date, and so that's why the active Fairfax team is looking to refresh that, and we can, as you mentioned, make some recommendations as well. Sonia, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I fully support improving the bike access along Haycock. I still, even without the connection to Great Falls, that seems appropriate, I guess, from Turner over. I really want to see the connection across 66 on that bridge. and that stretch between Route 7 and the bridge. I think it's really important to think about bicyclists and the movement because it is an important connection to the WNOD, to Falls Church as a whole. And also in the other directions towards Great Falls, like there are bike lanes along Westmoreland. I'm not sure all of Great Falls, but people do bike on it and we can make it better and improve those connections. And I think, how we prioritize them for this given project, remains unclear to me, but I think should be noted in the overall effort to improve connectivity in this 2-mile area.
Comments. So we'll go to Cheryl and then I'll try to finish up the last 3 slides here.
Tim, are you going to talk about budget? I mean, I'm asking this because we've had quite a few new voices, new members of our neighborhood show up today, and they're, I really don't want people to walk away from this meeting thinking that we have a big pot of money to play with. The fact of the matter is this AG doesn't have any money to play with, whether it's for sidewalks or bicycles or improvements. And we haven't really gotten into the funding stuff. Were you going to talk about that tonight or at another meeting?
So I'd wanted to have somebody from our coordination and funding division here tonight. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. So I will be bringing somebody to our next AG meeting. Go ahead.
And Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt. I really think it's important too, because people are asking about how much money this development is going to generate in terms of taxes. And a number of us raised this during the comprehensive plan amendment, and I think we need to raise it here. If Fairfax County doesn't have a way of taking the millions of dollars in revenues that are going to be generated by this development and feed it back into the community that's going to be impacted by it, it really is time for the county to start thinking about it. So I don't know, Tom is there, Jane is there. We have people who need sidewalks, we need crosswalks, and ultimately we're all going to be disappointed with the very few things that are going to be done in the 4 quadrants. So I want to lay that out there now because I don't want anyone walking away thinking that somehow we're going to get everything on this list that we've been talking about, especially when some of us are going to be adding things that are really important to our neighborhoods. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I certainly don't want people to come away with unreasonable expectations or to be disappointed with this process. We do have a big list, and really the goal of this group is to prioritize that list. And yeah, not everything's going to be able to get taken care of, probably not even half of everything, but we really need you all to just focus on what you want to see as priorities. And again, we can have the coordination funding folks here to kind of discuss what our options are. All right, I guess we can move on to the next. I think we got maybe 2 more slides, so appreciate everybody bearing with me here. We've talked a lot about facility improvements and recommendations, but some other recommendations, I kind of alluded to one earlier. Along Route 7, it could just be in the short term having some sort of maintenance agreement, really trying to apply some paint and do some of the more minor improvements like landscaping and regular maintenance to improve that walk path for folks. And you can see on the, can you go back 1 slide? Sorry. So you can see kind of a compare and contrast between Route 7 as you're approaching the interchange versus Monument Drive near Fair Lakes, where they do have an agreement with one of the businesses or offices there who comes and maintains that section. So it's sort of a similar situation, but it certainly looks a lot more inviting. So just some other things to consider. We've talked about pedestrian scale lighting, and we've talked about speeds, and you can see the map on the right, what the speeds look like in this area, particularly closer to the metro station. You have Haycock Road that goes from 35 down to 25, and then Great Falls Street, which is 35 miles per hour until you get into the city, and then it goes down to 25. So I spoke to VDOT about, this disparity, it would seem, and the different speed limits. And they said that it is something that we could at least look into, whether or not these speeds are appropriate. There would need to be a study to determine that. So just some other ideas to consider. We can move on to our last slide here, I believe, which is our next steps. So we're going to have our next technical group meeting in April, the week of April 11th, so we can discuss these recommendations further with them and any additional questions you might have for that group. We're going to meet again with you all the week following to review, as I mentioned, the future average daily traffic forecasts. We're going to get those before the next meeting. We'll talk with the coordination and funding folks, and then we'll set that initial list of recommendations and priorities. So we'll really be looking for your feedback next meeting on the priorities. I'll provide some additional tools within the coming weeks. As I mentioned, the vulnerability index, the crash history for this study area to kind of help you set those priorities. And then following that, having the initial list and the priorities, FCDOT will develop a community survey, so that'll go out at the same time we hold our next community meetings, which are going to be scheduled sometime in May. So we'll get community feedback, which of course we'll bring back to you all, and we can sort of finalize towards the end of this process in June, July, this list of recommendations and priority projects. So that's sort of the plan from here on out. Really just looking for you all to send me anything else you might have, clarifications on what we've discussed tonight, what your priority focus areas are, not only for the pedestrian network, but for that 2-mile radius for cyclists as well. And with that, if there are any more questions, I can take those, but if not, we can call it a night and meet again in a few more weeks. All right. Well, I think that's it. So I appreciate everybody's time tonight, and look forward to hearing from you all very soon. And we'll send you some more information as I'm able to. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, guys.